If the objective is the total destruction of Hamas, then, quote, the war will last 10 years. That warning by France's president follows the collapse of a 7-day truce after an Act 1 that reduced huge swathes of northern Gaza to rubble. How long will Act 2 last? We'll hear Emmanuel Macron and the warning issued by Joe Biden's defense secretary. If Israel doesn't do more to protect civilians, it risks a strategic defeat. We'll ask what Lloyd Austin means and what Israel wants. What are achievable objectives, both military and political, that can isolate and embolden Hamas and offer real hope to both Israelis and Palestinians? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, can Israel go it alone? Joining us from London, former U.S. Defense Department advisor Yasmine El-Gamal. Welcome back to the show. From Washington, D.C., Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's think tank. Your latest book, Gaza Conflict 2021, Hamas, Israel, and 11 days of war. 11, a very short number when we're thinking we're nearly headed to 2 months. Thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thanks for having me.
John Linden is Executive Director for the Alliance for Middle East Peace, an umbrella group for activists. Welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
And welcome back as well to Stephen Ekovich, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the American University of Paris. How are you?
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Francois.
Thank you so much. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. At first, it was airstrikes after last Friday's truce collapse. Now it's Israel calling for mass evacuations from the central southern town of Han Yunis as the ground offensive widens anew. Tanks entering that city. Charlotte Hawkins has more.
Thousands of Gaza's residents are evacuating yet again, some travelling by foot, carrying what belongings they can. After these buildings in Hamad, in the north of Han Yunis, were hit by Israeli airstrikes, those living nearby were quick to flee.
They started striking the buildings. We fled by foot. We don't have a car. We're heading to the south, towards Rafah.
Since the truce collapsed on Friday, Israel has ordered residents in some neighbourhoods to leave and head towards the Mediterranean coast and towards Rafah, in the south of the enclave. The Israeli army divided Gaza up into numbered sections.
We received a message telling us that 44 and 45 must be evacuated. We were in 45. My wife and children were terrified. We were forced to leave.
But Israel's military has also struck Rafah, where many of Gaza's residents are heading. The aftermath of Sunday's bombing is clear for all to see. Dozens were killed. An increasing number of displaced Gazans are arriving at the city and are living in overcrowded, unhygienic conditions.
A very crowded shelter. People were indeed sleeping either on the concrete floor. Some who arrived earlier in the war, they brought their cars, so many were sleeping in the cars.
Israel's military is pressing its ground offensive into southern Gaza, deep into the overpopulated region, maintaining that they are targeting Hamas fighters.
So, Yasmine El-Gamal, I'll read to you from the daily U.S. Defense State Department briefing, saying, quote, Israel's targeted evacuations are, this is a quote, an improvement compared to telling an entire city to vacate. Your thoughts? Is it different from before?
I think, first of all, thank you for having me, Francois. I think when we talk about things, whether things are better or different than before, I think it's really important to kind of recognize what's happening on the ground and look at it's basically a situation. It's basically a case of the least worst, what's happening right now. When we talk about improvements, when we talk about the impact of U.S. pressure or U.S. leverage, when you look at actually what's happening on the ground and the amount of damage that's been done, I don't think the word progress or improvement can really be used in this particular case. I wanted to read out just a quick data point from the Wall Street Journal. They basically said even if the war ended now, many people in Gaza have nothing left. Infrastructure, property, and other investments valued at $50 billion have been destroyed in the fighting since October. That's equivalent to roughly 2 decades of development support to Gaza. So just to give you a sense of the extent of the damage that's been done since October, decades worth of development assistance to Gaza. And we see it still continuing, as the Israeli military and the prime minister said that they see this going well into 2024. So that's really where we are right now.
Do you think it'll go well into 2024?
It was reported that when Prime Minister Netanyahu showed Secretary of State Anthony Blinken his plans for the coming weeks, Secretary Blinken harshly looked at him and said, "You don't have that much credit." But we've heard that before. We've heard before people, analysts, government officials saying Israel doesn't have that much credit left. They don't have that much, leeway left, maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. And so when Secretary Blinken is reported to say that now, after that much damage has been done, literally coming days after Israel said that it will continue this campaign through January of 2024 at least. That's another 2 full months of a campaign that has so far destroyed the majority of the north in Gaza, has destroyed the south, has killed 15,000 people, almost half of them children. We're looking at 2 more months of that.
Jonathan Chancer?
Look, I think it's obviously fair to say that this has been a very devastating war. But I think one has to ask really a question of what were the Israelis supposed to do? The Israelis right now are trying to fight for a situation where they can allow the southern residents of Israel to return to their homes. Right now, nobody wants to do that because they are fearful of another Hamas attack. They're fearful of another 10-7 of 1,200 people being murdered and raped. This is ultimately the challenge that the Israelis are fending off right now. They're trying to figure out how to reconstruct the contract that they have with their own people. It is in their national interest to finish this war so that Gaza can be reconstituted, reconstructed, rebuilt in a way that would allow for perhaps a different reality to emerge. The thing that seems to really be missing in all of this is where are the calls for the international community where they're pushing Hamas to simply surrender? This would be the easiest way out of this war if we could try to engineer something along the lines of what happened with the PLO in Lebanon in the 1980s. This would ultimately, I think, save us a lot of really just terrible things that could happen in Gaza over the next several months. I do believe that this is a campaign that is likely to last for another 1 or 2 or perhaps even 3 months, and I would suspect that fighting may continue long after that. But where are the Turks? Where are the Qataris? Where are the Iranians, the Lebanese? Where are the sponsors of Hamas who are watching this catastrophe play out in the Gaza Strip? Why are they not trying to push for answers right now to end the war more quickly, to bring about an end of Hamas and to bring about a different reality in the Gaza Strip? I just simply don't understand why we don't see more pressure in those places.
Jonathan, you referenced 1982 when the war between Israel and Lebanon ended, when there was a deal cut where Yasser Arafat and the PLO leadership decamped to Tunisia. We heard remarks from the head of Israel's domestic intelligence services saying they want to kill all of Hamas's leadership, including representatives abroad. This was in an interview conducted on Sunday. And so therefore, I ask you the question, if Israel's saying there's no way out, it's total destruction for Hamas, is it also perhaps not giving itself an exit ramp?
Well, look, I think that if someone came to the Israelis and said, here are the terms of Hamas's surrender, that we will see a complete demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. We will see Hamas leaders leaving the Gaza Strip and they will go to another place, wherever that place may be, whether it's Iran or it's Malaysia, nowhere near the Israeli border, I think the Israelis will have that discussion, and I think they'd be very pleased to do it because they didn't want this war to begin with. And I think that is lost in a lot of the media coverage right now. The last thing that the Israelis wanted was to be invaded, to have 1,200 of their people killed, to have 240 people kidnapped. They are responding now as a means to try to restore confidence in the security situation in Israel. That is the only thing that they are thinking about right now. If someone gave them an opportunity to restore that security and to create a new reality in the region where Iran-backed terrorist organizations aren't threatening their borders every day, I'm fairly certain the Israelis would accept a compromise.
Would accept a compromise. John Linton, do you agree with Jonathan Chancellor? There's an element of bluster in what the head of the Shin Bet said.
I mean, everybody's reaching for analogies, and Munich is an analogy, right? We're talking about the Yom Kippur War, Beirut in '82. I think what Jonathan is saying about trying to find a non-sort of war solution to what Israel has articulated to be its consensus position. And it's important to note that it does stretch very far from right to left, really, this sort of position around Hamas not being the governing authority or being degraded by the end of the operation. What I'd say is, during the week-long temporary ceasefire we had during the hostages exchange, I heard many more kinds of conversations taking place. Right, some of them in line with some of what Jonathan was talking about, finding creative diplomatic solutions that could provide different paths away from a full re-escalation like we saw in the first 7 weeks. And I think now, since the war has restarted again, I'm aware of fewer of those conversations, right? Because people are focused on these immediate humanitarian steps and on de-escalatory paths that deal with each 24-hour increment. And the international community has to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time. I think there has to be this creative, multilateral approach to finding some sort of a de-escalatory path that figures out how a minimum of Israel's goals, as well as a cessation of the kind of violence we've seen over the last 2 months now nearly, can be achieved. And I do think there are formulas that could be generated. It will involve a concert of countries that people have to be comfortable with, right? So I've also heard in press in recent days certain countries being othered. You know, we'll deal with X Gulf country, but not Y Gulf country, or this European and not that European. If we really want to find something that will work and will deliver the kind of change that can be implemented on the ground, I think we have to look at this multilaterally, where the United States has a key role to play, the Europeans do, and various Gulf actors, including some that some actors may find a bit more distasteful. You know, Qatar and Turkey have been talked about as problems, but they could also be part of the solution if your goal is to remove Hamas without a war, right? I think if you say that you're completely taking those countries off the table and Hamas needs to somehow be taken out of the Gaza Strip non-violently, find me a Gulf actor that can do that has the leverage to do it.
Right, but no disrespect, you interact with peace activists.
Yes.
In our correspondents who are just back from the field. They've been interacting with everyday citizens, and it's been nearly 2 months, and there's still this feeling of hell-bent on revenge.
Yes, but there's much more interesting things going on as well beneath the surface. So 2 observations on this. Now, the war in 2014 was nothing like the one we have now in its ferocity, but it was still the worst Gaza-Israel war we had seen to that point. And I remember visiting very soon after the ceasefire to both Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, and finding a huge degree of reflection and internal anger. Once the guns fall silent, it's asking a lot for people to be critical of their governing authorities publicly during a war where they're being pushed to their corners and there's a rally around the flag dynamic. I think after all of this, there'll be a reckoning in Israel and in Palestine. And I've heard, by the way, in Gaza, friends of mine, their families, be incredibly critical about Hamas, but fearing that sort of criticism being publicly aired, both for their own personal security, which should not be diminished. Hamas is still in control of the south, certainly the Gaza Strip, but also that it would somehow be instrumentalized and used as kind of an advocacy point cynically, rather than be the actual sincere anger and resentment from Palestinians. So I do think we will hear more of that. And one final point, we have seen lots of bereaved people, in Israel in particular, but also in Palestine, joining the peace movement as a result of this, right? It's an underreported phenomenon. I spent yesterday on the phone to someone who lost both of his parents in the attack on Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th, and is committing his entire life now to trying to find a path via Israeli-Palestinian peace for the kind of security he knows is only possible diplomatically. And let's see how much more of that we see.
All right, you heard John Linton's call there for the international community to come together. It starts with Israel's #1 ally. And on Sunday, the U.S. Defense Secretary served up a blunt warning to Israel.
You see, in this kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
Is that just lip service, Stephen Ekovich, or is the U.S. position changing?
I think we often forget that in democracies there is a cacophony of voices. We hear the Secretary of Defense say one thing, we hear senators say another, we hear the president making other propositions. Let's not forget that we're coming to a presidential election soon. The president has to deal with two very important constituencies to win re-election if he's going to continue to be a candidate. He needs to continue to have the Jewish vote, particularly in a state like Florida, which can be close. But he was elected last time because of the mobilization of the youth vote. And we see by the polls that the young in the United States are increasingly than in the past more Palestinian. So the Secretary of Defense, let's not forget, also has to express certain points of view that are going to help his president. And that undermines.
So this is purely about domestic politics.
It's not only about domestic politics, but we tend to forget the dimension of domestic politics when we're analyzing the geopolitics and the geopolitics of the region. I think we have to be careful not to focus on one voice or another voice, be it in the United States or in Israel and other democracies. It's easier with countries in the Gulf where populations can't express themselves so easily, or where the leadership of many countries in the Gulf are afraid of their populations, but nevertheless, for reasons of realpolitik, understand that Hamas cannot continue. So there's a real gap here. There's a difference then when we're analyzing the strategy of democracies and the cacophony of voices in a democracy, including Israel, and other countries which are not democracies and authoritarian, but nevertheless have to deal with, and sometimes they're afraid of their population. Qatar has a very small population. The Qataris, it's something like 2 million Qataris. That's only 10% of the people who are in Qatar. They don't have to worry about their population. They have a lot more room for maneuver, the Qatari leadership, than most other countries. Let's say the Egyptian population or the Saudi population.
So you're saying you have to deal with a lot of different variables. Jasmine El-Kamal, you're somebody who knows the inside of the Pentagon. When you hear Lloyd Austin talking about Israel running the risk of replacing a, quote, a tactical victory with a strategic defeat, is that about politics or is that just about military analysis there?
Sure. I was really glad to hear Secretary Austin say that. I've been saying the same thing for weeks and weeks. The difference between tactics and strategy, the gulf is really wide here. And what Secretary Austin was saying was basically, if you look at something that Jonathan just said, for example, a few minutes ago, and he said that one of the things that the Israeli government needs to be doing right now is restoring trust in the government amongst its citizens after being caught so off guard on October 7th. That's their short-term goal. Their long-term stated goal, Israel's long-term stated goal, is to have lasting security on its borders. What Secretary Austin is saying is that those two goals, because of the way Israel is sort of undertaking this war, those two goals are very much opposed in opposition to each other right now. The way that Israel is trying to restore trust amongst its population is just absolute, show of force, indiscriminate bombing, mass displacement. I mean, the things I don't need to repeat to anyone, the things that are happening in Gaza right now. As a result, if we all remember why October 7th happened, was not just because Hamas was planning it, but because the Israeli government also failed to listen to the warning signs from inside its own government. So if you are going to go in and you're going to decimate, Gaza, you're going to displace 1.7 million people, you're going to make the north uninhabitable, you're going to do all of those things. You're going to create more and more dehumanization on both sides. You're going to create more and more people who are looking at each other as quote unquote animals. That word that keeps being used now. We hear Israeli officials using that about Palestinians and not just about Hamas as well. You see this dehumanization kind of happening and attitudes hardening on both sides. So if that's happening now, how are you going to get to your position and your goal of long-lasting peace on the borders? And I want to make a final point on that, just because when it comes to that long-term goal of peace along your borders, you're going to need a credible partner of peace. And this goes to what John was saying. When the international community, when people sitting in Washington or other capitals talk about the need for a two-state solution, both the Israelis and the Palestinians have to put up politicians, governments that believe in a two-state solution. And right now, we have seen unequivocally that the current Israeli government does not believe in a partner for peace on the Palestinian side. They refuse to deal with the Palestinian Authority. Prime Minister Netanyahu consistently says that he won't allow the Palestinian Authority back in the West, back in Gaza the day after the war is over. So who is this magical actor on the Palestinian side that will somehow be representative of Palestinians, but also pass muster with the Israeli government? And to have them accept it being back in Gaza. And so, a lot of things are just not really adding up here. And that's what Secretary Austin was saying. Strategically, you are not making the right decisions, and you're not setting yourself up for long-term security on your borders.
Well, Jonathan Schanzer, again, is Israel talking itself into a corner? Do you agree with what Jasmine is saying?
It's hard to agree with a lot of what I just heard. And let me, I think, explain a few things from at least the Israeli perspective as I've learned it over the last several weeks. First is that fighting in Gaza, it's almost impossible to do this cleanly and easily. This is, of course, one of the most crowded places on earth. And yes, there will be the need to have populations moved as targets are struck where Hamas is using human shields, where they are using high-density apartment buildings, and when they are using the tunnels that exist beneath the ground, and they're firing from alongside civilian structures. We've heard Hamas talk about this. They don't care about the Gaza people. They don't care about governance. This is, I think, perhaps an open secret about terrorist organizations. They don't govern well because they don't care about the populations they purport to represent. Hamas absolutely personifies this 100%, and it's a difficult fight. The Israelis, I think, would rather not have to fight at all, but they have made a decision that they need to destroy Hamas because of the violence that was perpetrated on October 7th. And now that they're in Gaza, they're finding that it's not easy. And by the way, Hamas is finding that it's not easy, and so are the people of Gaza. It would be wonderful if the people of Gaza could temporarily move to the Sinai Peninsula where they would be in safety. The Egyptians have not allowed that to happen, and the international community
right, but
has
just
not
I just to Jasmine was making the point that right now you need interlocutors to be able to think about what everyone's been talking about, the day after. And that this is not an Israeli government committed to a two-state solution. That same State Department briefing, the United States saying it thinks the Israeli government needs to prosecute Israeli settlers who engage in violent activities against Palestinians, thus throwing more fuel on the fire. Do you agree with Jasmine on that point, that to prosecute this war, you need people who have foresight to what happens after?
Look, as far as the settlers are concerned, if they're engaging in violence that goes beyond what the state has sanctioned, absolutely, they should all be arrested. They should all be put in jail. They should be branded as terrorists. I think we can all agree on that. But if you look at what the Israelis have tried to work through over the years, There is no partner on the other side. Abu Mazen is 18 years into a 4-year term, and he's been funding the families and the terrorists themselves that have carried out attacks against Israel. There is no interlocutor in the West Bank. It would be great if there were, and I welcome the day that we see new leadership step into the Muqata compound in Ramallah. That would be a wonderful day where Israelis would actually have some confidence in the Palestinian leadership, where they'd be willing to work with them. But the Israelis still remember the Intifada of 2000 to 2005, where they went out on a limb offering a deal that was rejected by all Palestinian factions, and a war subsequently took place for 5 long years. The Israelis have yet to see someone step in since then that would inspire confidence and that would give Israelis a sense that a viable Palestinian government is going to take charge. What you see right now out of Benjamin Netanyahu is skepticism about the Palestinian Authority taking over the Gaza Strip for a reason. Abu Mazen is barely the mayor of Ramallah right now. So we need a lot of change right now, but it certainly doesn't begin and end with the Israelis. They are part of the problem, but they are not the problem. There is a much more complicated puzzle that needs to be solved in the region. It does not help anything to point fingers only at the Israelis right now.
John.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with this conflict is people decide that everything is all one actor's fault, right? And their priors will kind of dictate which of the actors they decide to apportion the most blame to. And it's a little childish, right? This is a very complicated, I know it's a cliche, conflict where all of the variables, and I mean all of them, are misaligned. Leadership in each one of the territories, Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank, if your goal is a two-state solution, you wouldn't really want to start from here. But also, we have internationally a huge deal of the blame also, where there's been lip service for a two-state solution for pretty much 2 decades now, with almost no policy backing it up, no real diplomatic efforts. It's simply become a talking point that allows us to kick the can down the road. And I think there needs to be a real reckoning. Electorates in both societies have to reckon with where we've gotten to, which is the worst moment in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but multilaterally, internationally, amongst us.
Okay, so let me just because earlier I asked Stephen Ekovich about whether or not the U.S. position is evolving. On a weekend visit to Qatar, France's president urging Israel to serve up a realistic, time-sensitive plan for its military operation.
I think we're at a point where the Israeli authorities are going to have to define their objective and desired end state more precisely. What is the total destruction of Hamas, and does anyone think it's possible? If it is, the war will last 10 years.
In fairness, Emmanuel Macron has been among those who said, I'm one of the ones who took their eye off the ball when it came to this. How much credence do we give to his words and his warning there?
I think it's a question that needs to be asked. We have to define what degrading looks like. I mean, I'll be honest also, I was in Washington very early on in this war, and there are definitely people in DC privately asking questions around what success looks like. I mean, President Macron is now saying it publicly from a podium. I think the instinct that he has to be able to look at the day after, he was the first leader, to give him credit, who arrived in Israel and, yes, gave full backing to Israel in order to respond to Hamas's attack on October 7th, but also talked about the diplomatic horizon, about the need for a two-state solution. He was the first of those G7 leaders who arrived who did that. And I think we need more of that. More of, in addition, as I said, to dealing with what's happening day to day, and it is devastating, beginning to sketch out what an actual diplomatic solution looks like. If you want to fight for the hearts and minds of those young, particularly Palestinians, but also Israelis who are making their mind up now, only 5% of Israelis currently believe in the idea of conflict management. It used to be the governing ideology, from centre-left to far-right inside Israel. It's collapsed. People are now looking for new alternatives. Some of them are quite scary, but they're also, I think, willing to look and examine at diplomatic ideas and non-violent ideas. And for Palestinians, the average age in the Gaza Strip is just under 17 years old. Many, many young people in Gaza who are looking at their lives, their homes, their families being destroyed, and are going to be asking big, deep, searching questions about what the future is going to look like. It's important for us internationally to offer an alternative to more of this despair. Something that's not just also wishful thinking and naive and kind of cliche-ridden, but something that's really clear and tangible. You can look at it as an Israeli and a Palestinian and say, yes, if we embark on this path, non-violent violently diplomatically, I think we can end up somewhere much better than where we've been.
All right, it's going to take a while, though, to get to that point. Before there can be the long-term solution, there has to be what happens in the short term. Last Friday, the Reuters news agency reporting that Israel's government was considering a buffer zone for Gaza. One diplomat telling the Haaretz daily newspaper that the international community is skeptical because there are, quote, no clear answers on specifics or guarantees that the buffer zone won't be permanent. Buffer zones, one of the concepts, well, it seems to be opposed by the Biden administration in Washington.
5 principles guide our approach for post-conflict Gaza. No forcible displacement, no reoccupation, no siege or blockade, no reduction in territory, and no use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism. We want to see a unified Gaza and West Bank under the Palestinian Authority.
Is that the right messaging, Stephen Ekovich?
To the extent that a buffer zone is just going to look like the Israelis taking more territory from the Palestinians, it's not going to fly. And I don't think ultimately the Israelis can do that without some sort of oversight, extreme oversight, if they do attempt to do that. I just want to say something about the comments of the Secretary of Defense, who sees, and rightly, this is the term that the military uses, the center of gravity. The center of gravity is the place where, when you put appropriate pressure, the entire situation goes in your favor. Indeed, the center of gravity is public opinion, but let the historian speak. We've been he's looking at the long term. Boy, we've been in the long term since 1948. And I think that's how the Israelis are going to see it also. Of course, they're going to listen to the Secretary of Defense. They're going to listen to people like Jasmine. Jasmine cannot know, as I cannot know, if the bombing was indiscriminate. I can't know that, and she can't know that. Maybe after the war there will be investigations and we can know something about it. We can know whether or not there was a real attempt to use precision bombing. But in no way tonight can she credibly say that the bombing was indiscriminate. Okay. And once again, it's a very difficult military terrain, densely populated. Unfortunately, and we're seeing a lot of civilian casualties. And in terms of trust, there's no trust anywhere. I'm not sure that we can have trust in Netanyahu as an interlocutor in this. We have zero trust all around. Perhaps the Qataris and others might be able to bring some trust to the table. Perhaps. The United States is, historically has given the Qataris a lot of leeway. Qatar has an unusual position in American foreign policy in the Gulf. The Americans are not happy with the kinds of interlocutors that the Qataris have, but they have them. It's the only country that, and the United States is tolerant of this. They are tolerating these relations with the Islamic Brotherhood. With
so
the
wait,
Taliban.
Are you suggesting here, Stephen, that the way in which we can have some kind of where the situation can progress towards the sparing of civilian lives, because that's the short term here right now, is through Qatar and not through the United States?
It cannot be solely the United States. The United States has influence, and I'm not sure the United States wants to have a significant role in this afterwards. I'm not sure that they do. I think they would much rather have the Qataris and others in the region play an important role, and the United Nations, if they can ever trust again the United Nations activities in Gaza. So I'm not sure that the Americans really want to implicate themselves more in this. I think they would be quite happy to bring in the Qataris and the Turks and others in the region to try to do something with this, particularly because they have the resources available to rebuild Gaza.
Jasmine Al-Gamal, you agree?
I disagree with a couple of things that have been said so far. So let me just, if you'll allow me to just respond to something that Stephen said and something that Jonathan said, and John as well. So the first is when we talk about whether or not either of us can know whether Israel is indiscriminately bombing Gaza. You know, I'm a former Department of Defense official. I spent 8 years at DoD. I am an analyst. I come on these TV shows not to give my personal opinion about what is happening in the world or this conflict. It is analysis based on facts and based on data points, right? That's what I come on here to do. There are ongoing investigations. There have been ongoing investigations regarding Israel's use of force in Gaza, two just in the last week coming from 972 Mag and from The Guardian, from an investigative reporter who's been looking for the last month on what kind of munitions Israel has been using and what kinds of targets are being hit. I would urge everyone on this panel to look at those two investigations if they have not already. And I say that with the utmost respect. I'm not assuming that you haven't read that. I'm just saying if you haven't, it would be good to. So when you are using, you know, several 1,000-ton bombs on a very densely populated place, that is not precision bombing. I'm not saying this myself. Secretary Blinken has said this. Numerous officials around the world have urged the Israelis to be more precise in their tactics. When Jonathan says that we know for a fact that Hamas is using people as human shields, there have been multiple instances when we have seen buildings that have nothing to do with Hamas being bombed, not only in this war, but in previous conflicts as well. Al Jazeera and other broadcast offices and buildings, bakeries, churches. I mean, this is not something that I'm making up when I'm on here. So that's just one important thing to mention. And we will know more after this war is over, but we already know enough to say that Israel has not been targeted in its bombing campaign. The second thing I want to say to Jonathan's point about the Israelis never having a partner for peace in the PA, and you talk about the Intifada and you talk about the rejections that the Palestinians have made in the past. And I wouldn't argue with how complicated this is, but I would point you to 2010, when then Vice President Biden went to Israel, presumably to restart peace talks, and the Palestinians were begging him to get Israel to stop building settlements so that they could go and show face in front of their people and say, this is at least what we're getting. We're getting at least a pause in building settlements, right? The reason the PA has no credibility is partly because it has not been given any wins by the Israelis. And I'm not blaming one side. This is an intractable conflict. Both sides, multiple sides are to blame, but we cannot minimize the intransigent role that the successive Israeli governments have played in the pursuit of peace.
Jonathan Chanzer?
Look, there's a lot we can talk about in response here. I think first, I think it's important to note that there's a word that has not been uttered throughout this entire panel, which is shocking to me, and that is we've not heard the word Iran. And the Iranians, of course, are the sponsors of Hamas. They're the sponsors of Hezbollah. They're the sponsors of the Houthis. They're the sponsors of the Shiite militias that are attacking Americans, American bases across the region. This needs to be brought into the conversation. Why it's not, I don't know, but this has been, I think, the case all along. What's happened is that this debate has instead devolved into the traditional Palestinian versus Israeli one. And I must say that I think a lot of what I'm hearing out of Jasmine right now sounds a bit like PLO talking points. And I think this is par for the course in a lot of these debates. There is no one that we can say is 100% wrong or 100% right in all of this. Mistakes are going to be made on this battlefield. What we do know is that an Iran proxy called Hamas carried out a slaughter on 10/7. The Israelis are now responding to that slaughter in an effort to defend their citizens from having to endure that kind of slaughter again. They are in the middle of a brutal fight in Gaza. Gaza is a very complicated battlefield. There are no definitive claims of war crimes, not from The Guardian, which is traditionally an anti-Israel publication, and certainly not from 972, which is barely a publication that anybody reads. These are the sorts of things that will be sorted out probably by Karim Khan, the prosecutor, the lead prosecutor of the ICC, who is in Israel and Ramallah right now, trying to make sense of what's going on. I'll listen to him before I listen to 972 magazine. But we all need to be aware here that this was not something that anybody wanted to see out of Israel, certainly not anybody in the Palestinian Authority, and certainly not the Gaza population. This was a war started by a terrorist organization sponsored by Iran, and Iran is now watching from the other side of the world, giggling about this mess that we're talking about on your program.
John Linden?
I mean, yeah, let's examine. I mean, Iran. Jonathan's right. Iran's role here is really important, right? We see like missiles being fired from in the Red Sea by the Houthi rebels. Obviously, the issues going on in the northern border as well. And the common denominator there is the Islamic Republic of Iran. What has allowed Iran to be able to project power so effectively into the Eastern Mediterranean? A few things, and one of them has been the lack of us presenting a diplomatic alternative. The status quo and this continued resentment around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the lack of a diplomatic alternative. It creates all this space, this vacuum for Iran to be able to very cheaply exploit. And as an idea for an alternative, because it actually links to something everybody has kind of hinted at. Imagine we had this more multilateral diplomatic process on the other side of this, and it brought in the Sunni Arab states. Now, what the Biden administration was trying to do before this war was to construct a new security architecture in the region that would be much more internally oriented, that would see this bridge between Saudi Arabia normalizing with Israel. And critics said that it kind of tried to circumvent the Palestinian issue. I think that's impossible now. No matter what happens after this war, we're going to need to center the Palestinian issue and realize that it otherwise risks upsetting all of your carefully constructed diplomatic plans. Imagine we built this internal plan in the Gulf that brought in wide actors, the United States, Europe, hell, the whole global South, but leaves Iran out of it, isolates Iran entirely, so that it's it and its proxy rebels and the rest of the world is saying we are going to embark upon a sincere project to end the occupation, create a Palestinian state.
So do it without Iran.
100%. The way that you isolate a country like Iran, which is a negative actor trying to clearly destabilize the region, is by creating an alternative hegemonic bloc that brings everybody else in and shows that these extreme actors who want to use violence for millenarian ends have nobody in their corner. And I think that the problem we've had is we've created way too much space in the middle. And Iran has been doing this for 20 years, appealing to Sunni Arabs as a Shiite revolutionary country by taking these different issues around the region and saying, we're the champion for this. We're on the side of the oppressed. And I think we've allowed them, I say we very broadly here, too much space to do that because we've failed to present an alternative.
Jonathan Chancer, you agree with that?
I suppose I do. I think what we need to do is we need to start working with the trusted partners that we can work with. By the way, I would argue that the Qataris are the wrong partners to work with. The Turks are the wrong partners to work with. Both of these countries have become sponsors of Hamas, and they should not be allowed to be both arsonist and firefighter. We should be marginalizing.
But Israel hasn't cut diplomatic ties. For all the heated rhetoric, and we've heard a lot of it over the last weeks, Israel's not cutting ties with Ankara.
They should be. And I think at some point they might. Certainly when you see the rhetoric coming out of Recep Tayyip Erdogan and some of the nasty things that he's been saying about Israel, impugning their motivations, et cetera, as they engage in a defensive war, you can see that ties are extremely strained. What we need to work with, in my opinion, is a coalition of pragmatic actors. And we've started to see that coalition of pragmatic actors come together in recent years. What I mean here is the United Arab Emirates and the Bahrainis and perhaps the Moroccans, maybe the Jordanians, although their rhetoric has been a bit spicy for my taste lately. But we need to find people that are not looking to score points, not trying to blame the other side, but try to solve a very complicated problem that has persisted for far too long. That's where this needs to go right now. And one does get a sense that this crisis has reached a boiling point that perhaps might finally force people to think about how we can de-escalate rather than escalate. That would be a welcome change of tune.
Oh, so there may be light at the end of the tunnel, Stephen Ekovich. But how broad a coalition do you bring in? Again, I'm following up on John Linden's counterinsurgency theory of peacemaking here.
I can't answer that now. I'm not sure anybody can answer it now. I think everybody's groping here to see what can be done. Why did the Americans put up with Qatar? Well, it's because they have relations with people that we detest, but they very cleverly are punching above their weight. So it's a small country its resources are gas and oil and the protection of the United States. But precisely because it's positioned itself in this situation, it's become an effective player in terms of realpolitik. We often make these ethical arguments, the arguments about supporting and advancing diplomacy. That's all good. In the end, it all comes down. It's the professor talking. It all comes down to power, and in this particular instance, the diplomacy is going to depend on the military situation.
It's going to depend
as in the long term of history, it almost always has. What happens on the battlefield is going to shape the parameters of the possible de-escalation and diplomacy.
Jasmine El-Gamal, the coalition for building peace depends on who's got the power?
Sure, and there are different kinds of power. There's military power, there's diplomatic power, there's credibility. I mean, these are all factors that have to be taken into consideration, but I think it's incredibly unhelpful. And by the way, I would just really be remiss not to say that I find it incredibly unfortunate and disrespectful for Jonathan to ignore the multiple points that I've put on this table for debate and dismiss me as spouting PLO talking points. I did not disrespect you in that way. I have been very careful about what I say and how I say it to every person on this panel, and I don't appreciate being sidelined in that way. You can easily respond to my talking points without saying that I'm spouting PLO talking points, because every point I've made is valid and deserves an answer in its own right, and I would appreciate that respect the way I've shown it to you. So when it comes to the coalition, I think that the coalition is very important. The makeup of the coalition is very important when it comes to solving intractable conflicts like this one, which did not start on October 7th, I might add. It is incredibly important to bring in a range of actors. Whatever people think of Qatar, whether they think it's a good actor, a bad actor, or a neutral actor, it has a seat on the table because it can deliver things like the humanitarian pause and the release of the hostages from the Hamas angle. So when it comes to assembling this table, sort of table that people are going to sit on to negotiate an end to this vicious conflict that's gone on for way too long, every person and actor and party that gets a seat on that table has to come with something that they can deliver. And that's how we have to think about assembling this coalition.
We're unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank you, Jasmine El-Gamal, for joining us from London. Jonathan Shancer in Washington. I want to thank as well John Linden, Stephen Ekovich. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
I'm John Zaragoza.